Welcome to Under One Roof MTL, where we are demystifying home ownership 1 week at a time. My name is Robin Flynn, joined as always by LJ Aguinaga of LJ Realties. Hi, LJ.
How you doing, Robin?
Pretty good. Also joined by Fred Pichette and Martin Spalding of Fred and Martin Mortgages. Hello, gentlemen.
Hi, Robin.
Hey, Robin.
We have so much to get to this week, but I'm going to start with our trivia question of the week, brought to you by Felix and Norton Cookies. You can visit their store at the Blue Haven Shopping Center, 3705 St. John's Boulevard in DDO. The first person to text in the correct response to 514-790-0800 will receive delicious cookies from Felix and Norton delivered straight to their door. Our question this week: what is the maximum amount you can withdraw from your RRSP under the home buyers plan? If you think you know it, 514-790-0800 and include your name, please.
Forewarning, there's a twist there.
There is a twist there.
There is a twist there.
And see if people figure out what that twist is. Guys, lots going on in the news this week. We'll try and steer as clear as we can from tariff conversations because it has been dominating the news cycle all week long. But let's look at the election. Now that, Trump's liberation date has come and gone, I think maybe we can focus a little bit more on issues that impact Canadians beyond Trump's tariff measures. So let's go back and look at sort of what each of the parties are offering in terms of housing specifically, but in terms of announcements as well that may have been made this week. So, LJ, I know the Conservatives made kind of an earth shattering announcement, or promise rather, this week.
Yeah, so they announced what's called the Canada First Reinvestment Tax Cut. And this plays off of what the US does. So in the US, you have what's called the 1031 exchange, which basically states that if you sell a piece of real estate and you buy another piece of real estate in the following 90 days, you're exempt from capital gains tax. So, pardon me, you're not exempt, you roll them forward eventually. So you kick the ball down the road. So what the Conservative Party has basically stated is like, hey, we want to keep funds in Canada. Canada's GDP is not growing right now. Let's encourage people to sell off properties that they have and reinvest in Canada. And we're going to do this all tax free, or sorry, you're going to pass the ball along further. So what this means is that if you're sitting on a property and you said, you know what, I don't want to sell it because I don't want to pay the capital gains tax right now. I'm just going to sit on it and hold it. Well, now you can effectively sell this property and you are exempt from paying capital gains tax so long as you invest the funds in any Canadian asset. Now, they've extended this to the stock market, they've extended this to Canadian corporations, to Canadian real estate. So they've really made it a very large scope in order to encourage Canadians to really get the economy moving. Let's start selling things, let's start buying more things, but within Canada. So really, Canadians are the ones that are benefiting from this, and our economy can be more robust realistically. So I think there's a really interesting proposal that they've put forth. And I think it'd be great for our economy if we could have something like this in place, regardless of who is in office. This is a huge move that I definitely am behind.
Very cool. Anything new from the Liberals, Martin? I know when we were speaking earlier this week, you had talked about this Build Canadian Homes Act that Mark Carney is promising, very similar to the strawberry box houses that were built right after the war, right?
Well, if you remember about a year ago, we started talking about the strawberry box houses. And these refer to these small, simple, mass produced homes built after World War II, between the late 40s and early 50s. And they were built to accommodate the returning vets and their families. Why they're called strawberry box homes? It's because when strawberries used to be shipped in these wooden boxes, and I guess they think that these houses resemble the boxes or the wooden crates that the strawberries were shipped in. Now, the advantage of these homes is that they were rapid, easy to build, and they were very affordable because they came with pre-approved plans, streamlined permits, low-cost materials, and there were federal loans and incentives. So that's exactly what Carney was talking about this week. And he, as very ambitious of him, wants to build 500,000 homes per year. So that was the big headline from the Liberals this week.
Interesting. I haven't seen anything major from the Bloc in terms of housing. I know they want all surplus federally owned properties to be used primarily to develop new housing for low income households. They want a tax on real estate speculation in order to curb rising housing costs. And then, of course, the NDP has a lot of what sounds like expensive policy plans in mind, setting aside 100% of suitable federal crown land that we already own to build 100,000 rent controlled homes by 2035. Actually, compared to Mark Carney's liberal strategy of 500,000 homes per year, that seems kind of tame. Also,
It seems like a drop in the bucket, right?
yeah, no
For seeing
kidding.
going away, but Carney's probably 500,000
A year.
a year, and the NEP are saying, about 100,000 between now and 2035.
Yeah. I know they're also pledging low interest government backed mortgages for first time home buyers, which is an interesting concept. But I think realistically, the odds of Jagmeet Singh's NDP forming government is probably not likely. If you look at the latest Leger marketing poll out this week, Mark Carney seems to be in position for a majority government at this point. However, there is a lot of real estate left between now and April 28th. A lot of more campaign promises that can be made between now and election day. So we'll see what happens. The conservatives aren't out of it yet, right? All it takes is one good debate performance by one of the candidates to completely shake things up.
However, so I know we didn't want to talk about tariffs, and we were all there on Wednesday in the Rose Garden with President Trump, and for some reason, Canada didn't show up on the board. So the next day, Thursday, Carney was getting credit for that. So good on Carney and good on the Liberals. But I agree with you. The Conservatives were having a rally on Wednesday or Thursday night, and they're having rallies to packed houses. So it really is a two-horse race.
Yeah, exactly. The Greater Toronto Area, LJ, I don't know if you saw this week, saw its worst February on record for home sales. Calgary home sales are down too. This seems to be the story across Canada. But from what I can tell, Montreal tells a very different tale. What are you seeing with Montreal's real estate market right now, LJ?
The Montreal market has been on fire, and we've mentioned it before in the show that we're always a little bit insulated from the rest of Canada. We do things a little bit different. The ups, the downs, we just don't move and jive in the exact same direction. But the reality is, we are coming off of probably the best month of March I've ever had in my career, to be quite frank, and bringing it back to COVID numbers and COVID days. So the market has been super active. People are out there. People are excited about real estate. People are buying. We've seen multiple offers come back. We've seen lots of visits. I was talking to a client a couple days ago, and he sent me the property within 24 hours of it being on market, and there was already 15 visits confirmed for the Saturday visit plot. So people are out there, people are looking at properties, and we're seeing this by the masses right now.
So LJ, would you say it's a buyer's or seller's market currently, or is it neutral?
No, it's definitely a seller's market right now. And again, it depends on what type of asset. Single family homes, sellers for sure. Multiplexes, seller's market. Condos downtown, still very much a buyer's market. Condos in the surrounding area, probably more neutral, even shifted to a bit of a seller's market. So it depends on the property type that you're negotiating on, but a lot of them are definitely on the hard seller side.
So if you had one piece of advice for a seller and one piece of advice for a buyer right now, what would it be?
Piece of advice for a buyer would be, first of all, get pre-approved. Second of all, study your neighborhood, understand what fair market value is and what your needs are, so you can really be prepared when you go see a property, understand how much you're prepared to pay for it. On the seller side, make sure you're working with somebody who knows how to market your property. Make sure you're working with somebody with experience who can control and manage the demand right now, because the last thing you want is to have somebody who doesn't have the experience to manage multiple visit requests, multiple negotiations, and then all of a sudden you're the person who's not getting the advantages of the market that we're currently experiencing.
You know who has the experience? If you're ready to buy or sell a home right now, LJ Aguinaga is your guy. Give him a call at 514-500-4040 and he can help you find the perfect home. And he'll also list it in a beautiful way because every time I see one of your listings on social media, they look absolutely stunning and highlight the best parts of that property. Still to come, everything you need to know about mortgage penalties and how you can avoid them. Fred is the expert on telling us the conditions of your mortgage. We're gonna check in with him and Martin, the experts, after we check traffic.
What is a prepayment penalty? This is your Mortgage Minute. A prepayment penalty is a fee your lender may charge if you break your mortgage before the end of its term. This could happen if you sell your home, refinance, or switch lenders early. The penalty is meant to compensate the lender for the interest they'll lose by ending the agreement early. The amount varies depending on your lender, your rate type, and how much time is left in your term. It's important to understand how a penalty is calculated before making a move. This way, you can plan ahead and avoid any costly surprises.
You're listening to Under One Roof MTL on CJD 800. I'm Robin. That's Fred. That's Martin. That's LJ. We are with you until 1 p.m. Mortgage penalties. It's not just about the interest rate when you're getting your mortgage. Getting the lowest possible rate may not always be the best option for you. Now, Fred, you've been banging into our heads since we started doing this show how important it is to understand the conditions of your mortgage.
Well, Robert, I always say to our client, and Martin hear me all the time, that a mortgage, it's not about strictly an interest rate. It really starts with a good lender, good loan condition, and obviously a competitive rate. Why we say that all the time because to our client is because most of people make the mistake of chasing the best interest rate when they should look at the condition of their loan. Because believe it or not, 7 people out of 10 end up paying a penalty and they're breaking their mortgage before the end of the term. 7 people out of 10. That's a lot. That's 70%, which is, I hear all the time people, no, not me. I'm not going to break my mortgage. Don't worry, Fred, I'm good. But it's not what happened most of the time. And when you break your mortgage, I want to just say that you're breaking a mortgage contract signed in front of a notary, which is when someone at the bank says, "Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. We'll find a solution." He's actually saying, I don't know, something that's not right because you're linked to a contract. Now, the penalty. What can I say about it? Um, First of all, if you're going for variable rate, obviously it's only 3 months of interest. You have a lot of flexibility. And on a fixed rate is the interest rate differential. Maybe Martin, you could explain quickly what the rate differential is all about, but that's based on the fixed rate.
So, sure. So, fixed rate mortgage penalties, it's usually the greater of 3 months of interest or the interest rate differential, we call it the RRD, which can be significant. And I'll give you an example. So, we had a client, 5-year fixed rate mortgage, after 2 years, decides to sell his house. Because, and I'll explain why, because the rates had dropped, the IRD, the interest rate differential calculation applied, and the penalty came out to be $15,000. Let's just say he was not very happy with his bank, and nor was this communicated to him upfront. That's why understanding how an IRD works before locking into a fixed rate mortgage is so important. So the interest rate differential is essentially the difference between the current rate mortgage, your current rate mortgage, and what the lender could earn today on a mortgage with a similar term length. The larger that gap, the more the lender loses when you break, and the more you're charged. And here's the sticker, or here's the kicker. Many lenders use the posted rates and not the discounted ones when calculating the IRD. This inflates the difference and makes the penalty larger. And what's even more frustrating is that every lender calculates their IRD differently. So two similar mortgages can have very different penalties depending on the lender. And so often I'll hear Fred, because Fred sits about 5 feet away from me, and he'll say, "We like the monoline lenders because their prepayment penalties are much lower than the conventional banks." And here's an example of someone that we forewarned. And he said, "No, no, I got to be there for 5 years, no problem." He goes and sells his house and slammed by a $15,000 penalty, calls us back. He goes, "Why don't you guys tell me?" And we did over and over again. And we even had to pull out the email and say, "We warned you, be careful because prepayment penalties can be really hefty."
Now, I think when people hear prepayment penalties, they're thinking about making additional payments. But in theory, if you sell your house, you're paying off the balance of the mortgage. That is prepayment, correct?
Well, because you're breaking. So if you sell your house exactly when your end of term arrives, there's no prepayment penalty. But if you amortize over 30 years, but within that 30-year amortization, there's a term. So whether it's a year, 3 years, 5 years, most people sign 5-year terms. So if you break your mortgage within that 5-year term, you can be confronted by a prepayment penalty because you're prepaying your mortgage back before then you said you would, and hence the lender is losing money, losing interest income on what you promised you would pay them. Hence, they want you to pay a penalty so they can recoup the lost revenue.
What's the best way to avoid having to pay a hefty $15,000 penalty? Should you wait until your mortgage term comes to maturation before selling your property? Is that the best option, Fred?
Well, obviously, if you could afford to wait at the maturity, it is the best option. But most of people, who's selling his property at the date of his maturity? I don't know, LG, if you see any, but it's so rare that people says, "Hey, I'm going to sell my property because next June or next July, my mortgage come up for renewal." Like it's not too often. Obviously, how to avoid a penalty if it's the case you're thinking of selling, let's say, in fall, and your mortgage come to maturity in June. Obviously, you maybe have the option to get a open mortgage with no penalty. Or if you're not too sure, maybe you could re-sign on a variable rate because it's the lowest penalty of the market, 3 months of interest only. There's a multiple way to try to avoid a penalty. But one way, sometimes it's not really possible. If you're overwhelmed by your credit cards, you cannot keep up with the payment, and the interest on a credit card is compound daily. Obviously, you have to take action. That's why at the beginning, before going running to a big banks because they have a very good interest rate promotion, think about those things because down the road you end up probably paying a very high penalty. Like it's good to value all your options before getting into a mortgage or before doing anything.
To find out more about what your lending options are, to learn more about your mortgage, just have somebody help you go through it and understand what your options are. Get in touch with Fred and Martin. They can help you figure out what the best option is for you right now. Visit their website, fredandmartin.com. Coming up after the news, we'll tell you what you need to know about the hidden costs that come with buying a new home or investment property. That's coming up after the news. This is Under One Roof MTL on CJD 800. My name is Robin Flynn, joined by Fred Pichette and Martin Spalding of Fred and Martin Mortgages, as well as LJ Aguinaga of LJ Realties. When you buy a home, you don't just need to have your down payment saved up. You don't just need to check out what your monthly mortgage payment is going to be or bi-weekly mortgage payment if that's what you choose. There's a lot of other costs that come with buying a house, and they can become nasty surprises at that last second. LJ, why don't you start with some of the big ones that I wouldn't call hidden costs because I think they're fairly obvious at this point. Things like your welcome tax.
Yeah, so there's I'd say 5 items that we talk about always whenever we're talking about closing costs on a property, right? And these are one-time fees that you experience whenever you are purchasing a property. But a lot of the time, it's not the items that most people think about, like you mentioned, down payment, monthly costs, etc. So go right into it. First of all, we have welcome tax or land transfer tax, land mutation tax. And this is effectively a tax that the city levies on anybody who purchases a home whenever they purchase a home, because this is part of their budget. It's just one of the ways that they collect revenue in order to provide you with the services that the municipality has offered you, whether that's garbage removal, sports, all that kind of stuff. So it's a tax that you have to pay, and it's a sneaky one. It's calculated on the greater of the purchase price or municipal valuation. So a lot of times people have it calculated based on their purchase price because they're getting a quote unquote below municipal evaluation deal, but your welcome tax is still going to be calculated on the higher value. Next on our list, we have the legal fees. In this case, generally speaking, we're talking about notary costs in the province of Quebec. The notary is going to be responsible for making sure that the property you're buying is completely debt free. So they're going to radiate and pay off any existing mortgages, liens, stuff of that nature, lines of credit, all that good stuff. They're going to make sure that the person selling you the property is actually the right person. It sounds trivial, but sometimes when people pass, where there's divorces, separations, all that kind of stuff, we have mix-ups in title. So we want to make sure the title is clear and in good working order for you, so you don't have any problems down the road. Legal fees these days are kind of varying between $2,000 to $2,500 depending on the complexity of the transaction, and depending on the lender that you're going with, that might actually play a role in the notary fees that you're going to have to pay. Next on my list, we have home inspection fees. So whenever we buy a property, we want to make sure that we understand what condition the property is truly in. So we're going to have a home inspector. They're going to come by. They're going to verify all the major systems. Now, it's important to note this is a visual inspection, so they don't start making holes in walls and stuff of that nature. But they do check out the condition of the entire property. They usually have moisture meters. Sometimes they'll have infrared cameras, all that kind of stuff. And they give us a full report, usually 35 to 85 pages with everything they saw. And this kind of becomes like your miniature handbook for the property so you can know what's going to be due in the next couple of months, years, etc. Next on my list of costs, we're going to have adjustments. Adjustments is a sneaky one that most people don't think about. But whenever we're buying a property, we have to reimburse the seller for any prepaid expenses that he probably paid for the property. The most common ones are your municipal and your school tax bill and condo fees, because typically those are prepaid or prepaid in advance, sorry, until about July 1st or December 31st, depending on where we are in the year. So the notary's going to say, okay, today's maybe May 15th. We now have to reimburse the seller from the portion from May 15th until July 1st. He does the whole calculation for you, but you have to be conscious that you're going to have that lump sum payment to make. If you did put less than 20% down, you took what's called an insured mortgage. And whenever we take an insurance policy in Quebec, well, we're subject to a 9% tax on this policy. So although you're financing the entire cost of the policy, you can't finance a tax. So whatever that 9% calculates out to based on your policy, you can speak about to Fred and Martin about what that's going to look like for you. You're going to need to have that a day of closing so that you can pay that off. GST, PST or GST, HST on new homes. That one is a sneaky one. I mean, I think at this point, everyone knows you're going to have to pay tax on a new property unless there's any exemptions that are happening. And you do typically see that on the purchase price. But if you did miss that, obviously that's something that you want to account for because it is a large sum of money that you need to make sure that you qualified for from a financing perspective. Moving costs is something that a lot of times people don't think about. A lot of times people think they're still 25 years old and that a case of beer and pizza is going to get all their friends to move them wherever they're going. But I think all of us have realized with the years that a case of beer and a pizza isn't enough to kind of have your back hurting for the next 2 weeks. So movers can cost anywhere from, let's say, $800 to $2,000, depending on how much you're moving, how large the property is, etc. So make sure that you take that into account in your preparation. Renovations and repairs, I sure hope that you budgeted for these after you did your inspection, after you visited the property and you're ready for them, but obviously making sure that you understand what it's going to look like. And a lot of times you should still consider a small budget, even if everything looks great, because a lot of time, once the furniture is out of the property looks a little bit different. There might be a few nicks and bumps or scratches on the floor that you weren't expecting, and it might be totally fine because you're planning on covering it up with your furniture as well. But having a small budget for that is always super preventative, obviously, and can help you along the way. Next up, utility hookups. Now, there usually aren't too many costs for that, but sometimes if you have a new internet provider, telephone provider, sometimes for connecting energy or stuff like that, there's going to be a few costs associated to it, especially if you're unplugging a gas stove and replugging in a new gas stove. You should have a gas plumber do that for you, and there's going to be fees associated to that. So make sure that you have a budget set aside for that. I think that covers most of our costs. Can you guys think of any, Martin? I feel like you have one right
Yeah,
now.
no, I always have the lawnmower conversation with a first-time home buyer. And so I have this conversation with them because just because they qualify for a certain amount, they shouldn't tap themselves out by extending themselves. Because when you become a first-time home buyer and you move into a new property, you always have to buy the lawnmower. You have to buy the ironing board. You have to buy towels. You have to buy forks and knives. There are so many expenses when you become a first-time home buyer that if you're tapped out, you become house poor. And then, hey, you no longer have a life because all you can do is live in your house and you can't fix up your house the way you want it to look like. And also, your lawn becomes unruly because you don't have a lawnmower to cut the grass. So I always say, yes, you qualify for that amount, but don't spend that amount because there are so many miscellaneous expenses when you first move in.
Oh, yeah, the lawnmower, you've gotta get the shovel, the snowblower, the tempo. That was a cost we didn't factor into our budget when we purchased our house. They're not cheap. Fred, is there anything that LJ and Martin didn't cover that you would like to add?
Yeah, one last thing I want to add is you need to have your money for your first mortgage payment that usually comes 30 days right after you moving in, which is it's good. The closing costs, yes, are mandatory, but also don't get house poor. You need to have the money to cover the first mortgage payment, which is what we always say to our client, like keep some money a bit aside for the closing costs, but they're usually a bit more than 1.5%, as LG said, you know.
Yep, absolutely. You're listening to Under One Roof MTL on CJD 800. I'm Robin. That's LJ. That's Martin. That's Fred. And that's Fred's dog. Coming up after we check traffic, our property of the week, plus the answer to our trivia question. That and more coming up next. You're listening to Under One Roof MTL on CJD 800. I'm Robin. That's Fred. That's Martin. That's LJ. We are with you until 1 p.m. Our property of the week. Last week, LJ, you were in my hood in Chattagee. Gorgeous condo, by the way, with that mezzanine. Absolutely stunning. I Go check it out on LJ's socials. Has it been sold yet, or is there still time if people are interested?
So there is still time. We've had about 8 visits on the property so far. There's 2 people who seem interested that are in debates and talking right now, but we still have an opportunity. If you're listening to the show, you want to come check it out. Alexandra's been taking care of the visits. It's been going super great. So come check it out.
Awesome. What else do you have to highlight for us this week? We're going to the West Island.
Today we're going to the West Island, yeah. So where I grew up effectively. So if you're searching for a luxurious, spacious home in Point Claire, welcome to 260 Avenue Hermitage, a stunning 3-bedroom, 2+1 bathroom, 3-story townhome with over 1,700 square feet of living space, listed at $950,000. Enjoy a bright, open concept layout, ensuite bathroom in the master bedroom, 2-car garage parking, a backyard, a laundry conveniently located in the basement. This beautiful corner unit offers the perfect blend of style and comfort. Nestled in a peaceful neighborhood, yet minutes from parks, Fairview Mall, schools, restaurants, and transit, this home offers the ideal balance of serenity and accessibility. My go to restaurant in the area is actually walking distance from the property, and that is not common in the West Island. So, there's a huge shout out to Scaroli's Pasta Emporium, a great classic Italian restaurant where they bring you fresh baguette with olive oil to the table when you arrive. The food is absolutely spectacular. My go to for years, following my dad's footsteps, has been the chicken parm with a side of Alfredo pasta.
Ooh, very nice choice. 3 stories. That's wow, that's a lot of living space. That's impressive.
Now, it's a very nice property. It was built in 2012, so still modern finishes and walking distance to the REM as well. So, kind of in the West Island, we think nothing is walking distance, but you're literally across the street from Fairview, the REM, Scaroli's, you name it, you got it.
And the REM is gonna be opening up soon. I think it's this fall the West Island REM project is supposed to be completed, so your property value will increase once that project is completed. I remember watching property values in Brossard skyrocket after they did the new Champlain Bridge, so now is the perfect time to buy this property before things go up. Okay, let's get to the answer for our trivia question of the week, a somewhat trick question, as Martin pointed out, brought to you by Felix and Norton Cookies. LJ?
Before we get there for a second, I almost forgot to mention we're hosting an open house today from 2 to 4 p.m. So stop by our open house. Nikita will be there. He'll be more than happy to say hi to you, show you the property. So if you're in the area, come check it out. And then, kind of piggybacking off of our trivia question, you're going to be pretty close to Felix and Norton. So stop by there and grab some cookies as well.
Perfect. 260 Avenue Hermitage in Point Claire is the place to go for the open house today. And yeah, once after the open house, go check out Felix and Norton. They're 3705 St. John's Boulevard in DDO. You know, 2 birds, 1 stone. Our trivia question this week brought to you by Felix and Norton Cookies. What is the maximum amount you can withdraw from your RRSP under the home buyer's plan? The answer is $60,000, but it's a trick question, right, Martin?
Well, it's a trick question. It's so if you're married, it's 60,000 per person, so 120,000. But this rule just changed, and that's where the twist was. So if people answered 35, which was the old number, wrong. The new number is 60 per person.
60. And do you have to be married, or if you're just buying a house with your common law partner, that's fine too?
All good.
No, you don't have to be married.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. Let's recap some of what we learned this week. We learned that the various political parties are offering a variety of things in terms of housing, and there are new announcements each week. So don't just look once and think you know everything and then head to the polls on April 28th. Pay attention to what's going on, maybe at least once a week. Just do a quick recap of what all the different parties are offering. And we do have the debates coming up in less than a week, I believe, in fact. So all that is coming up very soon. We also learned that you need to pay attention to more than just your interest rate on your mortgage. Pay attention to what those penalties are. If you've got a variable rate or a fixed rate, that could impact the penalties if you break your mortgage. We also learned
Robin,
that
one
there
comment about penalties. If you ask your bank, what's my penalty? Get it in writing.
very important to get everything in writing.
Yeah,
It's
because we've had some occasions where people have had selective memory and they said, no, I never said that. And the person thought their penalty was X and it ended up being Y. So a little tip, get it in writing.
always get it in writing. We also learned that there are a lot of costs associated with purchasing a property in Canada beyond your down payment and your first mortgage payment. You need to factor those costs into your budget. What percentage of a total home's property would you estimate is the right amount to set aside for your closing costs, LJ?
It depends on your purchase price because the welcome tax is on a sliding scale. So as you get into more expensive properties, the welcome tax goes up with it. But the banks have a general rule of thumb of 1.5%. If you want to be conservative, you can round that up to 2%, if you will, and that should generally have you covered. But if you do enter the luxury space of 1.5 plus $1 million properties, then you're going to want to get into closer to 2.5% around there.
Good to know. That pretty much does it for us for this week. We will be back next Sunday at 12 p.m. right here on CJD 800. In the meantime, to learn more about us and the show, you can visit our website, underoneroofmtl.com. You can also reach out to LJ, Fred, and Martin individually to get personalized advice that is appropriate for you and your situation. LJ, where do people go to get in touch with you?
You can check out our website, ljrealties.com, or on all socials with the handle LJ Aguinaga. That's LJAGUINAGA, or LJ Realties, IES at the end. You can also call or text me at 514 500 4040. More and more callers have been texting you, so it's always great to hear from you. Can't wait to hear from more of you. If you are looking to free up some of your time, contact my property management company, Plex Doctor, to take over and give you your time back. That's really the most important thing when it comes to real estate. If you really want this to be a passive investment, you need a property manager to step in and take care of things for you. And we manage every single property as if it was one of our own. So you can find us at plexdr.com or call my property manager and partner, Thierry, at 514 709 6397.
Fred, Martin, where do people go to get in touch with you?
Very simple. Fredmartin.com, Fredmartin.com. All the information is on Fredmartin.com. So if you're looking to send us an email, give us a call, or to book a meeting, Fredmartin.com. Said 4 times this week.
And and also, if you need any advice or you're not sure about something, feel free to reach out to us. We'll here to help.
Perfect. If you missed anything, you can listen to this show in its entirety on the iHeartRadio app. It's also on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as all previous episodes. You could binge us like a Netflix drama and get super informed on real estate and mortgages. For LJ, Fred, and Martin, I'm Robin. Have a wonderful Sunday.